This day in sports history. A proud member of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sports. You can learn more and find more podcasts at sportshistorynetwork.com. It's July 7th, and 100 years ago on this day, it was the event that inspired an Oscar-winning movie. It was the 1924 Olympic Games. And just like they will be this year, the Olympics were held in Paris, and the movie that would be inspired by the events on this day was Chariots of Fire. If you remember the movie that came out in 1981 and won 4 Oscars, including for Best Picture, then you know the movie follows 2 Englishmen on their journey to the 1924 Olympics. There was the Jewish Harold Abrahams and the devout Christian Eric Liddell, and I bring up their religion because it was central to the movie and to what happened at the Olympic Games. Abrahams was a student at Cambridge at the time, and he faced anti-Semitism there and in English society in general. But Abrahams was also a believer in conforming. He wrote an article during his time at Cambridge in which he said, English Jews should ignore Jewish Sabbath restrictions in order to compete. Judaism forbade work or competition on Saturdays. Liddell was a strict believer in honoring the Sabbath for Christians, and he refused to participate on Sundays. On this day, a Monday, it was the 100-meter race. Liddell was initially slated to race this event, and Abrahams had been preparing to run against him. However, the heat races for the 100-meter to qualify for the final were held on Sunday. When he learned this, Liddell stuck to his religious belief and pulled out of the event. He only ran the 400-meter event. Even with Liddell sitting the race out, it wasn't a given that Abrahams was going to win it. He had failed to qualify for the finals in Antwerp 4 years earlier. He had a strong desire to redeem himself here in Paris, and he had hired a coach named Sam Musabini to help him achieve his goal. The favorites in the race were the 2 Americans, Charlie Paddock, the so-called fastest human on the planet, who had won the gold medal 4 years earlier in Antwerp, and Jackson Schultz. When the race started, Abrahams got a great start in lane 5, and he outraced Schultz to the tape, winning by a foot. The stopwatch read 10.6 seconds, Schultz at 10.7, and Paddock, a distant 5th, at 10.9 seconds. The movie depicts Abrahams losing in the 200-meter final before the 100-meter event, but it was actually the other way around. He won the 100-meter gold, one of only 9 gold medals the English won at the 1924 Olympics, before failing to medal in the 200-meter event 2 days later. Liddell would go on to win the 400-meter event on Friday, July 11th, setting a world record in the process. On this day in 1912, Jim Thorpe won 4 of the 5 events in the Olympic Pentathlon and took the gold medal. This was the first time that pentathlon was offered as an event during the Olympics, and all 5 events took place on this day. He started off besting Ferdinand Bia in the long jump, finishing 3rd in javelin, then winning the 200-meter run, topping fellow American and future IOC president Avery Brundage in the discus throw, and then closing out the day with a 5-second win in the 1500-meter to destroy the competition. However, the gold medal he won on this day would be stripped in 1913. Now, I've talked about that in another edition of This Dish, but I'll talk more about it on the July 15th edition when Thorpe pulls off another amazing Olympic feat. Let's take the bullet train to 1986, and on this day it was Jackie Joyner putting her stamp on greatest female athlete honors. Jackie Joyner, and later as Jackie Joyner-Kersee, was a track and field superstar. Today was her coronation day. This was the old Goodwill Games, and this was the first iteration of the Goodwill Games held in Russia. And for those unfamiliar, the Goodwill Games were the brainchild of cable billionaire and Atlanta Braves and Atlanta Hawks owner Ted Turner. Following the Olympic boycotts of the U.S. in the 1980 Moscow Olympics and the Soviet boycott of the 1984 U.S. Olympics, Turner developed an athletic competition to bring the 2 superpowers together along with the rest of the world. After glasnost and perestroika leading to the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 90s, the Goodwill Games lost its purpose and it ended in 2001. But this was the first time at a global competition that U.S. and Soviet athletes had been on the same track. Okay, enough politics. Joyner had actually captured the hearts of the Russians in the stadium on the first day of competition when she set a first-day record. Now, this was the second and final day of the Heptathlon. And for those needing a little 411, Heptathlon is 7 events wrapped up in one competition. It shows an all-around athleticism as opposed to a specialty. She started day 2 with her favorite event, the long jump, and set a world heptathlon mark with a jump of 23 feet. That left her with the 800-meter run as the final event, needing only a pedestrian 2 minutes 24 seconds to set a new record for the overall heptathlon record. Well, she bettered that time by 14 seconds, winning the 800 meters with a time of 2 minutes 10.2 seconds. Totaling up all her points, it gave her 7,148 points, 202 points better than the old mark set 2 years before by an East German athlete. If Joyner had stopped competing in the heptathlon at that point, it would still be the world record. But she didn't stop. She bested her own record 3 more times. The mark she set in 1988 in Seoul, South Korea, is still the world record. How about this story from 2009, when Alan Embree became just the second pitcher to win a game without throwing a pitch? It was the Washington Nationals playing the Colorado Rockies at Coors Field. With the score tied at 4 in the top of the 8th inning, Embree was brought on in relief with 2 outs and a man on first. Before throwing a pitch, Embree threw to first in a pickoff. Austin Kearns, the base runner, had already taken off to second and now was caught in a pickle. Embree moved over to first, and when the ball came back to him, he tagged out Kearns for the 3rd out in the inning. In the bottom of the 8th, Embree got pinch hit for, and the Rockies scored a run to take a 5-4 lead. Reliever Houston Street came on in the 9th and shut the Nats down to record the save, and Embree picked up the win without throwing a pitch. It was just the second time it had happened in the major leagues. It was also Embree's last win in his 16-year career in the majors. On this day in 1985, Boris Becker became the youngest man to win the Wimbledon title. The championship match was a surprise all around. Becker had advanced to the finals as an unseeded player and was playing Tim Curran, who had beaten top seed and 2-time defending champ John McEnroe in the quarterfinals, and then knocked off 3rd-seeded Jimmy Connors in the semis. Becker beat Curran in 4 sets to win his first Wimbledon title, his first Grand Slam tennis title, and was the youngest to win the men's draw at Wimbledon at 17 years, 7 months, and 15 days. Now, was Curran a little overconfident coming into the final? He admitted later that he had gone to a Bruce Springsteen concert the night before, so he may not have been 100% focused. But then again, he had a right to be a little overconfident. Not only had he beaten McEnroe and Connors, but he won both in straight sets. In fact, prior to the first set in the final on this day, Curran had not lost a set since the second round. And let's finish with a little style and flourish. On this day in 1928, Rene Lacoste beat Henri Cochet in 4 sets to win his second Wimbledon title. It was his last Wimbledon trophy and the 9th of his 10 major tournament wins. While he may have been at the tail end of his tennis career, he was ready to take the world by storm in another field. Now, does the name Rene Lacoste sound familiar? Well, if you've ever worn a polo-style shirt, then you have worn one of Lacoste's creations. If you've ever seen or worn one of those polo-style shirts with an alligator logo on it, then you have worn Rene Lacoste's brand. Rene became known as the Alligator after a sports writer overheard Lacoste make a bet with his tennis coach for an alligator skin suitcase. Rene said it symbolized his tenacity on the court and the idea that he never gave up. He started wearing his famous gator on a blazer in the 1920s. A couple of other things you may not have known about Lacoste. Roland Garros, the venue for the French Open, was built for Lacoste, Cochet, and 2 other French players nicknamed the Four Musketeers. And Lacoste was also the inventor of the automated tennis machine to help him work on his lob shots. And time now for today's non-sports Did You Know? Between the 1940s and the 1970s, pinball was considered gambling and was illegal in the United States. That's all for today. I'll have more tomorrow on this day in sports history, and hey, if you have a moment, How about subscribing to the podcast if you haven't already? And if you're digging the show, how about leaving a review on Apple Podcasts? Or if you're listening on Spotify, you can actually comment on the particular episode. That comes directly to me, and I'd love to hear what you think about the podcast and about this episode in particular. Either way, no worries. Thanks for stopping by, and I will be back tomorrow with another edition of This Day in Sports History. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.